I can't just go and ask somebody what they think about this or that. Talking about what I believe brings condemnation. What would be your advice to people who are going to go up and ask people, how do they do it without running into something that will just polarize them back into their own corner further?
It's the left's fault, and I'm going to call out all my fellow lefties. You guys suck at talking to people who disagree with you. You suck at making arguments. You suck at being objective. You suck at being reasonable. Stop painting every single Trump supporter as a racist. Stop painting every single person who disagrees with you and might lean more Republican as a Nazi. What's the result of all this? Fox knows they're dead to rights. They settle the case for a grand total of like $780 million with Dominion. Bro, if you're writing a damn near $1 billion paycheck, you know you did something wrong, okay? Nobody writes a nearly $1 billion check because they were right.
Tell me about how Trump actually tried to steal the election.
In the lead up to January 6th, they brought 50 some odd court cases. Every single one of them were either dismissed before trial. There was just that little evidence of voter fraud.
Man, the deep state's working double time, huh?
Right? Yeah. And that would be the thought. Problem was, something like 10 of those judges were Trump-appointed judges.
True. Bingo.
Once all the court cases failed, he had one final pin to pull out of a grenade.
Well, Johnny, welcome back.
What's up?
On an episode we planned to release before the other one we were going to planning to release. So this one's been put on double time production schedule.
Is there like something going on, or?
What's that thing that happens? I mean, hell, it's only happened like maybe 3 times in my life where I've been old enough to care, but I've heard about it where they elect like a leader of the free world, the United States, and has like one of the largest nuclear armaments. And yeah, I think that's important. Do you think it's important?
It is important. There's a big election coming up, probably one of the biggest that I can remember, and I've seen a couple more of them than you. But
really, there's more of them.
Yeah,
I thought George Bush was the first president.
Nope. In fact, as early, like some of the earliest news stories I remember is Bill Clinton not having sexual relations with that woman.
Thank you.
I'm
glad he told the truth and came out and told us that he didn't. I wish.
That's some of my earliest memories of like American politics is the Bill Clinton scandal and the impact on the election that had. And man, it's a really funny reflection of today, because that actually was a scandal then. Like, people were outraged at like, oh, how could the president lie about it? It's like, now we have grab him by the pussy and you know,
the Overton window of presidential affairs has just moved.
Listen, he was only held civilly liable in that rape case, okay? We're not talking about a criminal indictment, so it's fine.
It's different. It's different.
It is somehow different. Meanwhile, Bill Clinton wasn't guilty of anything other than lying under oath, right? Like, he just had
it was
an affair.
Consensual.
Yeah, it was. But that's like, the difference of that should be huge, and like try to convince a current today, you know, diehard MAGA supporter that that's a meaningful distinction.
Right.
Probably not.
Right.
Probably not going to work.
Well, Johnny, you earlier we had a conversation. You had introduced to me the idea that despite a lot of people having the idea that the media is largely left-wing and paints Trump not favorably, you pushed back on that, and you told me, well, you think that the media actually helps Trump or supports Trump or is not what most people would think. And I'm like, wow, that's a hot take. What do you mean by that? And that's where you said this would be the episode. So I'm going to kind of let you lead this, and I'm just going to pick your brain on where this goes.
So I'm gonna take a page out of my philosophy playbook, and I'm gonna lay out like 3 different premises to this conclusion. Okay.
Perfect.
First one that a lot of people, I feel like, don't understand is that in our country, we have a center-left party, the Democrats, that are much closer to the center than most left-wing parties abroad. And then we have a far-right party, the Republican Party. And so our notion of left and right is askew compared to most of the West. So premise one is that if you're going to be objective in the media, which is to say, I think most people would agree that objective does not mean neutral. If you have a Nazi on, and then there's just like a regular person, acting like those two sides have an equal say at the conversation is ridiculous, right? Everybody can agree on that. You wouldn't give them an equal say. It's not like, oh, let's hear out these equally placed ideas and pit them against each other. We've dispelled Nazism. We're good, right? Uh-huh. So objective means you have to tell the truth and call BS where BS can be found. And so basically what that means is if you have a media that's acting like a far-right party is an equal and opposite force to a center-left party, there's a rub there. That's my first premise. Second premise is that in general, all media, but especially corporate media, their primary bias is not towards a particular party or ideology. They don't have an ideology. Their only ideology is for profit. It's the only thing it can be. They're giant media corporations. They're run by some of the biggest companies on earth. I think AT&T owns like a third of all the media companies in the United States. So their bias is towards profit. And what drives profit in a 24-hour news cycle is sensationalism. Okay. So
yep.
Premise two is there anything more sensational than Donald J. Trump?
What a blessing to the American media.
Exactly. And then premise three is that because we don't directly pay for our subscriptions to these media companies, they're funded by a nefarious third party that doesn't have your best interests in mind. And that means because it's primarily done through advertising dollars, exactly what those people want can be paid for on the American media channels. By and large, what do large corporations with a lot of money to throw at advertising at media companies tend to favor? Low regulation, lower taxes for themselves, basically getting the government out of their way so that they can continue to grow their business and their profits. And then we've seen over and over again that they're willing to throw as much money at that problem as it takes to solve it, right? Mm-hmm. They do this through massive super PAC donations, but they also do it through buying a shit ton of ads. Like the numbers are staggering. And you don't notice it, but if you sit down and you watch an American media channel, every single commercial on whether it's Fox or CNN is going to be from a pharmaceutical company or a healthcare company or a defense contractor or someone who is already lobbying big dollars on K Street across from Washington, D.C. And it's like convenient that why are these the TV ads that they add on? Is me seeing an ad for Lexapro gonna be why I get it prescribed? Is that like directly marketed? Can I go to my doctor and be like, yeah, I saw this commercial. Can you get that for me?
Actually, you can here in America, which is funny, but
but the doctor's also going to say, I need to at least prove that you need this medication, right? And if they determine you can't, then you don't get it. Like those ads are not about driving customers for drugs. That's not how it works. They already do that through the drug reps at the doctor's office, and they offer kickbacks to the doctors at the doctor's office. They don't need the TV ads. The TV ads are about buying a narrative, which we'll get into. So all of that leads to the conclusion that the media can't possibly be favorable to the Democrats and favorable to the left wing, because if they were and they actually did their jobs, left-wing policies and Democrat politics are actually much more popular in the United States. They would demonstrate this through objective analysis. They wouldn't act like there are two equal sides because, again, we have a far-right party that has a bunch of policies that aren't popular at all. And they would present that in a way to the American people that it would remove all doubt. And then they would lose their rat race. They would lose their horse race. And that is the most sensational thing that they need to keep to sustain. They make more money during election cycles than they ever do at any other time during their existence as media corporations.
Very interesting.
Where do you want to start with picking that one apart?
That was your third, or was that your second?
That's my third premise.
Okay.
So the third premise is that they're beholden to their advertisers, who primarily favor Republicans.
Now, what you just said makes total sense, that media companies are by and large bought by and paid for by large companies which want less restrictions, and companies which want much less restrictions are usually not have the best interests of the people they're serving to. They just have the best interests of the product they're selling, or the service or whatever. That makes sense. What now to the average person who supports Trump, which I used to be, what I see is constant like media berating Trump, always trying to make him look the fool, and that's how I always viewed the media in terms every time I saw Trump on some sort of article, TV station or whatever. How would you address that? If that's a specific enough question to ask, I guess. It's pretty vague, but bear with me.
No. I think if I can condense it, I mean, essentially what you're saying is, how can they support Trump if they just bash him all day? That just on its face, that doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Okay. So my first question would be to you. When do you think it was well known from Trump getting into politics? When do you think it became well known in media in terms of the people who produce and make this content, these shows, that bashing him was actually making him more popular, and that the triggering of the libs was actually fueling the new Republican movement called MAGA?
Some 4D chess they were playing here, dude.
It's not necessarily like a 4D chess situation, because I don't think they necessarily intended on fueling it. It's more like they just didn't care. Because look, this was known by the end of the Republican nomination process. And you can see when their tune changed, right? In general, the media at first was treating Trump, before they thought like he could actually win the Republican nomination all the way back in 2015, 2016, like that run up to the 2016 election. Their initial treatment of him was more like fun. Look at this crazy guy that isn't really going to win, but he's making the election interesting. He's making it fun. Then all of a sudden it became serious that he could win. And they started ramping up Trump could be dangerous. But then they also were overconfident and thought that he would just obviously lose to Hillary Clinton. When we actually get post-election, I would argue that by that point, they know that their endless everyday coverage is part of the reason why he won. They made him more popular by hating him so much. And they knew it.
I mean, yeah, when they bashed him, it definitely didn't turn any opinions. It just, anybody who had slightly inclination towards Trump saw that he was like being treated unfairly, you could say, in terms of the media. And they're like, wow, that's unfair. They must really not want him for some reason. And that's not fair to him. So I'm going to support him, Mm-hmm. And anybody who didn't like him for any reason, it just polarized. It just pushed everybody who was here out here.
Yeah. I mean, in some sense, the interesting thing is, I think what a lot of people have the illusion of is the other side of that coin is, let's talk about Fox News and them. Because, I mean, I think the illusion is that they love Trump. And certainly, if you're an average Fox News watcher today and you watch a typical segment on Fox News, I mean, that is their brand now. But I encourage you to if you can find it on YouTube or anywhere, go back and try to find Fox News running up to the 2016 nomination, because they did not love Trump.
Really?
And yes, and there was regular battles between Trump. It wasn't until he became the nominee that their tune started to change on Fox News. And so then, because ultimately the thing that the media has to do is present that there are like two equal sides, even if they think Trump is not a great candidate at Fox News, they have to continue to build him up because they present themselves as the counterweight to the liberal left and the liberal media like MSNBC and CNN, etc. So now they have to change tune. They have no choice. That's their business model, regardless of what they actually think internally. What a lot of people don't know is, flash forward to the 2020 election, we have the chaos that is Donald Trump calling into question the legitimacy of the election. Now, regardless of what you think about that today, whether there was some issues or whether there's not, this is the most interesting fact, is that there was a defamation case by Dominion voting machines. The company Dominion that makes the voting machines sued Fox News for defamation because they went on TV over and over again. A number of their hosts, primarily Tucker Carlson, kept saying a bunch of things implying that Dominion had fraud with their voting machines. When that became obvious that it was not true to everyone, that's now a defamation case, if you can prove that Fox News knew they were lying when they said it. That's what has to be proven for defamation. So a lot of people don't know that. You have to be able to prove that this business entity knew they were lying in the media about the fact.
Did they find proof?
Did they prove it? Well, here's what they did find. Through legal leaks, through discovery process of the case before it ever went to trial, because it didn't go to trial, got settled, but I'll get to that in a minute. What they were able to do is show emails from as high profile people, including Tucker Carlson, saying things like they hated Trump, saying things like they knew that the Dominion story and the election denial was total BS and that it was ridiculous. They couldn't wait for Trump to go away so they could stop covering him. And so their internal communication is 180 degrees the opposite of what you see every day when you turn on the channel. And this all got revealed in that defamation case. In the I can't remember what it's called, but they do like the discovery part of a civil trial where they release like
deposition?
Information. No, that's for, I think depositions are for criminal trials. This was like when they do like in a civil case where they have to like gather all their files, all their evidence that's going to be talked about like during the case. So all this stuff gets revealed. Fox News is scrambling to try and hide as much of it as they absolutely can. Tucker Carlson comes out looking like the worst villain of all this because he clearly knows that he's lying every single day on a show. His emails, his personal emails are demonstrating 180 degrees the opposite of what he says on air. And he's even worse today because like now he still is singing Trump's tune even more than when he was still on Fox. He's gone even further in that direction, despite we know him lying and the internal saying how much he hated him.
Wow.
So what's the result of all this? Fox knows they're dead to rights. They settle the case for a grand total of like $780 million with Dominion. So I'm going to suggest to you that if you think, well, they settled, so that doesn't really mean they were guilty. Bro, if you're writing a damn near $1 billion paycheck, you fucking know you did something wrong, okay? Nobody writes a nearly $1 billion check because they were right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not I promise you they're not that much of the bigger person.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So they would have fought it. And I think that that's one of those things that, again, that's one of those things, if you did not have independent media as part of your viewing, if you had mostly right-wing biased media, they did not cover that story.
I've never heard of that.
They did not want to cover it. And yet it was major news. It was in every mainstream media outlet. You can go read the case. You can Google it for yourself. You can look up YouTube videos of people explaining what happened with the Dominion lawsuit and hear the evidence for yourself. Don't take my word for it. It's plainly obvious if you just go read it.
But man, my day is so busy that I'll never be able to get around to all this, dude. It's easier just to believe like Trump was wronged.
A 10-minute YouTube video is worth finding out. Look, what you should do.
Not in my algorithm. I promise you that. It was never put in my algorithm.
you gotta go search it. And
there you go.
The Google search that you would have to do would be something as simple as what exactly was the settlement in the case between Fox News and Dominion. I don't know what their full name is, but the Dominion voting machine company. And if you search that, you could probably find one 10-minute video breaking down the whole thing. They'll probably prevent the most damning forms of evidence, which is so funny. Turned out in the end to basically be Tucker's emails and his staff's emails. And the fact that they had that in hand is what would demonstrate that it was obvious that Fox knew they were lying despite defaming Dominion, even though they knew there was no fraud.
Johnny, you said the words earlier, when it came out that the election wasn't actually stolen, and that was obvious to everyone. You said that 5 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. However, I don't think that's obvious to everyone. Because until me meeting you a year ago and you kind of explaining it to me, I was still under the impression that there was a lot of funny business that happened in the election that kind of screwed over Trump. So dive into that.
So let me give the 5-minute rap sheet. So I want to clarify the earlier statement. When I said obvious to everyone, what I meant was obvious to everybody working in the media companies that were still saying it. Because the whole job of a media company is to investigate this to know the truth. Right? That's what it's supposed to be anyway. So they did their homework, investigated it to find out the truth. Their internal legal teams, their internal actual journalistic organization was saying, hey, we don't think this is legit. Don't go live with this. And then the hosts were like, who gives a shit? I'm doing it anyway. Right to the TV screen because it was a good story and they couldn't help themselves.
That's a lot of work for our 24-hour entertainment station, dude.
Yeah. So they did the journalistic work. They realized that some of the information was skeptical at best. So one example, I'm just going to give a rap sheet of things where this becomes obvious that they know they're lying. One of the principal parts of this whole thing, if you were following it at the time, was obviously Rudy Giuliani. He was one of the ones bringing the court cases. He was one of the ones championing this election was stolen over and over again. He morphed his whole pro-Trump career around this in the 2020 election, right? He's the one doing most of the heavy lifting. In 2 different cases where he is now criminally convicted and he's now disbarred as a lawyer, he had to admit that he knew he was lying because they had him dead to rights. That's one huge piece.
What does that mean?
Dead
to rights.
Basically, they had evidence that he knew he was lying about the voter fraud, that he wasn't telling the truth, which is why he's now disbarred as a lawyer. He can't practice law at all anymore.
Makes sense.
So, and he's not the only one. There were a number of other people around Trump, around the 2020 thing, that have since been convicted. Okay. So the problem is those people at the time, these cases were already starting to pop up against them. Even before that, in the lead up to the January 6th events, you had, and my timeline's fuzzy because I haven't followed all of this. In fact, Destiny on YouTube is probably the one who did the best breakdown of it. He has a 2-hour video that explains everything that led up to January 6th and what all the election denial was all about. And it's good journalistic work. I mean, he did his homework. He spent a whole week on stream pulling everything together and even did a focus group. It was kind of interesting. But so he would be a better person for specific timelines. But basically in the lead up to January 6th, they brought 50 some odd court cases. Every single one of them were either dismissed before trial or immediately thrown out because there was just that little evidence of voter fraud. The media
the
knows
deep state's
this.
working double time, huh?
Right? Yeah. And that would be the thought. Problem was, something like 10 of those judges were Trump-appointed judges. But
True.
I would suggest
Bingo.
out of self-interest, they didn't want to also be removed from ever being able to practice law again or be a judge. And so if the case is that bad, they knew it would just be obvious political hackery if they had gone along with it. So they threw it out where it made sense. The juries, the ones that had jury, based choices, the ones that were like criminal, those all got thrown out. There's another one that's on the rap sheet where, and this is, I think, what Giuliani got actually convicted of. It's also what Newsmax got sued for. They presented a video of a woman who's like, that, like, she was like one woman that they had a video. This was one of the things they claimed evidence of. You might have seen the video. A lot of people saw the video of her doing something with pulling a box of ballots somewhere. And she was like an election worker. And they're like, see, these are the secret ballots here's all the voter fraud. That story was totally bogus. She was suing all of these people who defamed her because her life became filled with death threats. And I mean, obviously, right? Like, the right wing is highly motivated. They think the election was stolen. And that's what's being told and rather sold to them on Newsmax, One America News, and Fox every single day. And so they buy into this. They think that's like legit. And that results in her life becoming miserable. And so she takes legal action against these people. That was one of the cases, I believe, against Giuliani. I might have some of my facts about that slightly wrong, but these are the things that, again, people in the media, it was obvious to them that this was a known lie. And that was true for every single media company. We know that from their internal documents. Newsmax actually lost their lawsuit against Dominion. They actually tried to fight and failed.
Wow. What was you and I had a conversation one time about some big bust at Newsmax. They got exposed for something big.
Oh, yeah. Here's the funny part about that. I don't remember the specific one that you're talking about because that's how many there were. Like, there was a cycle of between, I would say, 2020 and 2022 where that story kept having more and more crazy things about it all around election, all around clearly favoring certain politicians, all of that. But it was beset by the fact that at the same time you had a Republican guy in New York completely lie and manufacture his own career to get into the House of Representatives. Crazy story, took up 2 weeks in the media cycle, right? So you had all these other like big stories going on at the time. Do you not know about that? About the Republican House of Representatives member? Like Santos or... I'd have to Google it really quick.
Is it George Santos?
That might be it. Yeah, George Santos. The guy who completely made up his entire identity.
I could be making that up too.
Being funded. I'm not sure.
Yeah, former United States rep. Yeah, I've heard about this.
Yep.
I don't know about it though. But either way.
So there was a George Santos happening every 2 weeks for 2 years. We also had COVID in the news. We also it was just it has been such a whirlwind of crazy in the news cycle that I would forgive every single average MAGA fan, Trump supporter, for not knowing this because it's too much to follow.
Dude, it's a big country.
Too much to follow.
We got a life, we got dogs, we got kids, we got a job, we've got a house, a mortgage to pay for. It's like, hell, who you comes down to vote, cannot take. You cannot do the required work to figure out who's the honest candidate at this point.
Yeah, and I'm talking about the ones that are genuinely interested in it and aren't part of because I think everybody agrees at this point who's not in the cult that there is a cult level following for Donald Trump where all this stuff could be true. They would never care about it. But for the ones that could be swayed, like you when I first met you, right, that are interested in being objective and learning facts and trying to understand the situation better, it is too much for you to figure out on your own. Unless somebody does a really good job of compiling the information for you. And that sucks because then it becomes about, well, I'm not sure if I can trust that person. And that's what happens. A lot of it becomes about, I don't know if I could believe that because it was on CNN. I don't know if I could believe that because it was on MSNBC. It doesn't matter what the true or not true is. So my appeal to those folks, if you happen to be watching this, is what about the judges? What about the Trump-appointed judges in the 50-some-odd court cases? What about the fact that Fox News, the news station that you would think would be more likely to be on your side, which means you would maybe trust them to be more objective? What about them completely throwing in the towel and paying off Dominion? At some point, you got to look at all that and say, okay, maybe there's something here.
What do you think?
Investigate it.
Tell me about the alternative ballots.
Oh, the alternative electors?
Yeah, tell me about how Trump actually tried to steal the election.
Yeah. So this is the thing that most of the actual people around Trump are going to prison for. Ultimately, what happened is once all the court cases failed, he had one final pin to pull out of a grenade to throw it into the situation where a lot of people have heard the famous thing where he's calling the guy in Georgia about find me 23,000 votes, right? So he hit a desperation point where he's just calling governors and saying, hey, I need 23,000 votes in your state. And people were like, well, yeah, he's trying to like overturn the election fraud. But I think when you get to that point, you're pretty desperate. So his last ditch effort is he organizes with some Trump loyalists in 7 or 9 different states. I can't remember if it's 7 or 9, but it was around that number. But it was all the ones that were consequential to the election. Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona. And he's trying to get them to produce, and he does effectively create alternative slates of electors. Now, if you're like, what does that mean? Let me explain. You probably know there's an electoral college. Depending on your state, most of the states in the union are winner take all. So if your state votes 51% Republican, 49% Democrat, all of those electors are going to go to the Republicans candidate. Okay? If you're in a state that goes the other way, all of your electors from your electoral college are going to vote for Democrats. The way that process actually works is that all goes to Congress. They certify the election results. Then the vice president does the final certification. So on January 6th, the day of the chaos at the Capitol, what those folks were actually trying to do and what Donald Trump was talking about when he said Mike Pence needs to do the right thing is that they wanted to delay the certification process so they could create enough chaos to say, hey, we can't trust the official electoral college votes, and here's this alternate slate of electoral college voters that Trump had basically had these loyalists create, and they were fake. They were not legitimate. They were not the legitimate results of the electoral college from those states, but they were going to have Mike Pence certify those instead, which would have made Trump the winner. What that means is if you were in a state that voted 52 blue, 48 red, your vote wouldn't have counted like it was supposed to. Your vote should have rolled to the Democrats, but Trump's electors would have been for the Republican instead of the Democrat. And that would have been in 9 states, and it would have essentially worked. Like if Mike Pence certifies that election, it's over. Trump's the president again.
Really? Where did they get those alternative ballots from? How did they create those?
So it's not a ballot. It's like a letter of certification, essentially, is the way it works. So if you're one of the, states have very few electoral college members, right? So if you're one of the electors from the state, that's a person who's assigned to it. Now you're bound by the results of the election to do a specific thing. And so you fill out this formal, form that is, I'm submitting my electoral college vote for this candidate. And then that's what goes to Congress and the vice president. Okay. So the alternates is basically all the real ones got sent. State election boards and the governors and office, all that got done, got sent to Congress. It's there on January 6th, getting ready to be certified. The whole point of delaying the certification process on January 6th by Congress. The reason why they stormed the Capitol is so that in the confusion, they could swap in these alternatives. So there are some of these people who are going to prison because they legit violated the law. They knew they were creating and forging a fake document that of being a electoral college elector, even though they're not.
So if Mike certified the fake ones, how could Trump still be president if they could easily go and show, like, well, the ones he certified weren't even real? It's like there's no take backs.
No.
How?
Because
How?
it's unprecedented. It's unprecedented. No one's ever tried to do anything like this. Like, this is not normal.
That
Nothing
seems like an
about
easy
this-
fix, though. Like, say he did certify fake ballots. Like,
Absolutely. It would be an easy fix. But by then, who would already have power? The Republicans.
who has power at a swap, though, at that point? Like,
From the moment he certifies it on January 6th, you think that in the month before inauguration, there's any chance of figuring out how to combat something that there's no legal precedent for? There's no legal precedent. So there's nothing you can take to court and say, well, look, this law was violated. It's a perfectly legitimate process. Ultimately, who certifies, like the way it says is the electors that will be certified is Congress and what Mike Pence does. Now, is there a chance it wouldn't hold up? Yeah, there were tons of legal experts that went on TV and said that this could be challenged. The point is why are we even talking about that? What, like, at that point, does it matter? You have a candidate who clearly intends on circumventing the democratic will of the American people.
right.
He just does not care about what your actual vote was, you know?
And you got to think about, what if he did get away with it, and what if it did go through? He wouldn't care. You
Nope.
know?
No, there's going to be no accountability, at least for him personally. And so there's been I would argue, very minimal accountability for everybody else.
Now, if Trump tried this, a lot of people went to prison because of this. Why didn't he go to prison because of this? How is he removed from it?
Because the people who were orchestrating coming up with the alternative electors, again, there's no crime for this. And then the worst thing is, even if you could convict him of a crime, one of the cases against Trump is about the alternative elector slate. The Supreme Court ruling that was very recent, it was just a few months ago, basically declared that any official acts that Trump did while president, he has immunity from prosecution for. Because it was done as an official act of the office of the president. So that Supreme Court ruling, which happened because Trump was able to, during his very short term, appoint 3 justices to the Supreme Court. So he has a 6-3 favorable court. They ruled in a 6-3 ruling that essentially Trump can't be held accountable for this because he was acting as an official of the government through the office of the president. So that Supreme Court case makes it impossible for him to be prosecuted for this now. And the alternative electors thing, it's going to essentially go away. He'll probably never face accountability. Now, the individual people who committed fraud, here's the interesting. Some of the alternative electors were literally swindled into making their forgeries and faking being an elector. They didn't even really understand what was going on. They just thought they were, doing something. And this was orchestrated by people around Trump, like Giuliani, like some of the other. I mean, there's tons of players. But again, I'm far from the expert on all of this. I've watched stuff from Destiny. I've watched a lot of debates that Destiny did making this case to Republicans, or Republican favorable members of alternative media. And you can go watch that stuff if you want to spend 50 plus hours like I have. Every single time he makes the case, he doesn't seem to lose one of these debates because it turns out most people who were supporting Trump had no idea the extent of just how obviously fraudulent this was.
Makes sense.
There's really no argument, which comes back to the point. Objective media can't possibly present this as two legitimate sides to a story. But what did most of the corporate media do? Well, I don't know.
I mean, it was common sense among Republicans. The election was stolen.
Right.
You know, that's what it just seemed really fishy. Even to me, even though I hadn't done like a ton of research on all of it and hadn't been super involved, but that's 95% of the voting population. You know.
Yeah.
And not even the voting, not even to talk about the non-voting population, which supports it but doesn't care to go out and vote. You know, they're doing even less work, and they still believe it.
So let's address that really quick. What were the things that made it obvious to you that there was something fishy going on?
And we're speaking about past royal, so let's be very fair.
Yeah. Yep.
But one thing that stuck out to me, that everyone talks about is I don't even remember how many votes came in at 4 a.m. in whatever state. Help me out here. Like this was 4 years ago.
So the biggest claim that a lot of people had that did seem fishy was if you went to bed on the night of the election, November, was it 4th? I think November 4th or 2nd.
Sure.
It looked like Trump was winning. And it absolutely did. Now, all of a sudden you wake up in the morning.
Joe Biden's president.
Joe Biden, yeah, right? Like, how did Joe Biden out of nowhere win these states? I don't get it. Trump was winning. He was winning. So why did this happen?
It's no object permanence. It's the peekaboo, dude. Where'd he go? You wake up.
It's how did this happen? You're looking at it, and again, that does look crazy. Especially if you were only watching Fox News, Newsmax, One American News, Tim Pool, Ben Shapiro, even your independent media. If they leaned right, you were never going to hear about this. And the irony of this is what I'm about to tell you was on every single left-wing YouTube channel I watch every single day. They were talking about this over and over again leading up to the election. It was also on CNN, MSNBC, all of those. Everywhere it was something called the Red Mirage. And so what the Red Mirage is that for the last 4 months, due to COVID, Trump's been saying mail-in ballots are fraudulent. Don't do your ballot through the mail. Go vote in person. If you get sick, you'll be fine. That was one of those famous quotes. He's like, you got to vote. It's too important. Don't worry about COVID. Even if you get sick, it's worth it. This election's too important. Which is like such a crazy statement to me because a lot of his supporters are very old and probably the most susceptible to COVID, right? Mm-hmm. The whole thing is under no circumstances vote mail-in because you can't trust the mail-in ballots. He's already setting up for months leading up to the election that they're going to try and steal it from Donald Trump. So what happened, the Red Mirage, is that Democrats are like, I'm not going to go to the election place in the middle of a pandemic. Fuck that. I'm mailing in my ballot because we, generally speaking, most of us on the left were not COVID skeptics. We were very worried about COVID. We were following all the guidelines and trying to do as much social distancing as possible. And even with a mask on, if you've ever been to a polling place in any kind of city, like the busier city polling places, they get pretty stuffy with a lot of people packed in like sardines. And like we know that. So I mailed in my ballot. A lot of people did mail-in ballots. And so if the Democrat Party overwhelmingly did mail-in ballots, the mail-in ballots get counted last. So the Red Mirage that everybody said is probably what you're going to see. The media outlets all knew that very likely on election night, it's going to look like Republicans are winning until we start counting the mail-in ballots, which are going to overwhelmingly favor Democrats.
Dude, I'll tell you what, in 4 years since the election, never heard about that ever. Like,
yeah.
Never. And this comes from someone who's just, it has to be, I just have an algorithm that supports like right-wing stuff, and you know, it's stuck that way. I never see Destiny on my algorithm.
Right.
I never see any left-wing commentators on my algorithm. I couldn't name a single one. And I'd say I'm pretty tech savvy. You know, I'm on there a lot. So
This
it's
is
just it's the bubble we all live in.
This is a great time, and I don't think there's a lot more that we can talk about how the media like favored the sensationalism of the 2020 election, and like you didn't hear about this, but you can see where things start to get polarized. So my advice to everybody is watch people you disagree with on purpose. I regularly watch Ben Shapiro. I regularly watch Tim Pool. I regularly watch segments from Fox. I watch Piers Morgan. Because as much as Piers Morgan wants to pretend that he's independent, he's super right wing. It's very obvious from how he talks. I mean, for the love of God, the guy supports the monarchy.
I know.
It's like the most unpopular position I've ever heard.
Ridiculous.
So you might say, okay, why? Why should I do that? Well, if you want to come up with the most objective analysis, you need to know where the actual people who support different positions are. And I'm going to say that you can't get that in corporate media. Those people are so far removed from normal Americans, you'll never get it. Now, there are problems with independent media, which we're going to get into. It's one of the things we're going to talk about today is the recent case involving Russia funding some of these channels.
Bingo, dude.
But before that, real quick, you might not even know what kind of left-wing channels to go watch to like get the other side, right? If you're in the right. And if you're in the left, you might not know some of these right wings. So I would say look up Daily Wire. If you're on the left, watch some of their stuff. They do a good independent media job of presenting the ideas that probably disagree with you. You can get what they kind of stand for on things. And they're very good at what they do. I mean, they're a very good media company in the fact that it is entertaining. I sometimes just find myself laughing hysterically at Ben Shapiro. Now, for me, I'm laughing because he's so outlandish to me. But if you tend to lead, I mean, he's a funny guy. If you like what he's saying, he's pretty funny. He's witty. He's quick. Tim Pool is worth watching if you want to see the dumbest takes, quite frankly. Like the very low IQ. This is the guy who said, I'm predicting a 48 state sweep for Donald Trump. So if you want that guy, you can see the spectrum of much more intelligent, right? And much less intelligent, right? And then like
that's
one
the
other,
right wing.
Yeah. And one other channel, if you want somebody who presents themselves as a centrist, but clearly favors like Donald Trump and the Republicans, is Piers Morgan Uncensored. And he does panels where he brings in debates from different sides. So you can get kind of more the middle perspective. Okay. If you're on the right and you have no idea what left-wing channels are, I'm going to plug my three favorites because they're very, because they're, yeah, right. My three favorites because they're all very different in terms of how they present their channels and what they do. So the first two are what I call news entertainment. They present their stuff as just like, they're going to read you news that you could go find on your own, but they're going to find the most entertaining or most interesting and provide their takes on it and their commentary. And that would be Sam Cedar, and Secular Talk with Kyle Kulinski. You will get, with Kyle Kulinski, you'll get much more watered down, much more straight to the point. With Sam Cedar, you'll get a lot more of like, they're very biased and they don't hide it at all. Like they don't even try to like, they just bash the right. And so okay. You'll get like two different spectrums. And then someone very different who I think tries to operate a little bit more like a corporate media channel of I'm always going to be the most reserved, even though I'm biased towards the left. I'm always going to reserve judgment would be David Pakman Show. All of these are on YouTube. Everything I just mentioned over the last 2 minutes, it's all on YouTube. You can go find it.
I mean, honestly, the best thing I think you could do as well, if you have any sort of interest in seeing the opinion of the people who disagree with you and why they form their opinions, even if you don't want to take the work to look at all those videos and watch all of them right now, just go and click on their channels, click their videos, click to another one, and just keep clicking back and forth to different videos just to tell your algorithm that, hey, you have some interest in this. So when one day you're scrolling through your feed and you have nothing better to do, you're going to have a left-wing video pushed into your algorithm that looks interesting and has a nice thumbnail and a good title, and you're going to be like, huh, that catches my attention, and then you'll watch it that day. But the good thing is just to get your algorithm to suggest some stuff that's outside of your bubble. That's what I would do.
Absolutely. And how about this? Let's go old school. Ask someone.
Oh my God,
Ask
no way. I can't handle confrontation and talking to people who don't agree with me, dude. It's the worst.
So go in with it of tell yourself, I'm gonna swallow my tongue when I want to be like, I don't believe that, that's crazy. And just figure out where somebody else who disagrees with you's positions are. Right? So go talk to, if you're on the left, go talk to a Trump supporter. I still do this all the time and say, why do you think this? Because I've heard this from the right or whatever, or what do you think about this political event? And when how they saw this major thing over the last like 8 years, completely different than you, just take that information in. Don't offer your normal pushback. Don't offer your rebuttals. Notepad. Write it all down in the little noggin or on an actual notepad.
And just ask the question, how could they have seen it so differently, and how could you have missed everything that they saw? How's that possible?
And then Google. Because you will, if you are genuinely like, I've never heard this, or this seems like crazy out of left field, there's no way that's true, you'll go find it, and you'll realize it's a way more wide-ranging perspective than you saw. And look, there are times that all of those channels I mentioned that I tend to agree with more. There are times I disagree with them, and that is because I get a diet of both. But the times I disagree with them is like 5% compared to 95% on the other side, because I'm trying to do an objective analysis. And I think we've reached a point where there is no, like, to even pretend that the two sides of the current political spectrum are equally opposed is lunacy when we're talking about a candidate who, as I laid out earlier, clearly tried to steal an election. Like, even if you agree with it, if Donald Trump had the politics of Bernie Sanders, I would be calling him a traitor.
Right. And that's the thing. That's honestly what changed my opinion on Trump completely, was when you laid out for me how he was actually the one that actually tried to steal the election. And I'm like, wow, that brought his character in my eyes at that point from all the way down. Yeah. There's no legitimacy there. It's completely dishonest. It's wild. One thing I do want to say about that, though, Johnny, that I was just very, I guess, grateful to meet you was I am a type of person where I do want to ask other people what they think. And I do want to be objective, and I do want to know what they and why. Because ultimately, I want to find out the truth, even if it doesn't agree with what I previously held a belief in. I ran into this issue where I can't do that. I can't just go and ask somebody what they think about this or that, because even me talking about what I believe just brings condemnation, or hinting to that, hey, I'm curious what you think about this, and you were kind of the first person that like was nice enough to like not burn me at a stake when I brought like something I believed to you and asked, how do you dispel this? What do you think of this? What would be your advice to people who are going to go up and ask people, how do they do it the right way without running into something that will just polarize them back into their own corner further?
Yeah. All right. It's the left's fault. And I'm going to call out all my fellow lefties. You guys suck at talking to people who disagree with you. You suck at making arguments. You suck at being objective. You suck at being reasonable. Stop painting every single Trump supporter as a racist. Stop painting every single person who disagrees with you and might lean more Republican as a Nazi or any of those things. And maybe you're like, oh, I don't really do that. Go back and look at your Facebook feed. Go back and look at the type of rhetoric you have when you're in your own enclave. And you absolutely do. And so what problems is what leaks out into those conversations is you are, even if you don't think you're messaging that way, it comes across that you really fucking don't like these people. And they can tell. So then they just don't bring it up. And look, I'm guilty of this from time to time because I do feel like there is a slow progression towards fascism happening in this MAGA movement. And that's, I mean, again, when we're talking about stealing elections, it's nothing's much more fascist than that, right? So,
Mike Lindell advertises his pillow as $14.88.
the Nazi dog whistle.
Dude, unreal.
So, and look, for the left, be curious, not judgmental. It's the greatest quote in the universe. You are probably not curious enough, just like I'm talking to the right about how could somebody come to this totally different perspective than mine, just interpreting the facts. You're not curious enough about how someone could come to believe those things. So instead of being curious about it, you make some judgment like, oh, they must just be bigoted. They must just be racist. They must just not like my party because they want to hold people down who are marginalized. That's not how normal people operate. That's true for like the tiny 1, 2, 3%. The average MAGA supporter just wants government off their back. They want a better life for themselves. They want the same things you do. They want better values. It's just they've been propagandized to hell. And so, just like you've been propagandized to hell. Now, again, maybe your propaganda is more true than their propaganda. That could be. Objective analysis will determine that. But how one comes to the beliefs is not their choice. It's not like they woke up like, I'm going to choose the fascists. Yay. Like exactly. they come to believe that to be the case. And then they turn to the strongman that is Donald Trump because they're like, he's the only one making any sense to me. And so to get to the bottom of that, you got to be nice. You have to be real with them. You have to do that. So let's say you can't find any of the lefties that actually take my approach and are nice and are kind and hear their perspective out. Now,
our Discord is open.
Yeah, right. You come hang out with us. I want you to go to journalism school and get your little spiral weave notepad and flip a couple pages and write over and over again every other page. Don't respond. Just ask questions. Don't respond. Just ask questions. Play stupid and then go talk to a lefty. Look, I'm not politically connected at all, and you seem to know stuff about this. What's the deal with January 6th? Is that a big deal? Should I care about that? like play as dumb as possible and just hear someone who's willing to explain their perspective. Don't respond. Take notes. Even if you feel yourself, again, the disagreement regurgitation, it's very, very hard not to go. I want to tell a story about this. And it was one of my favorite conversations I ever had because I actually made my mother do this. Now, for perspective, my mother is full MAGA. She's a pastor. She is about as extreme right-wing as she can get. She denies vaccine validity. She denies the election. She, go down the list of, those, right-wing, common, positions that have been common in the far right. She has them all. At one point, she told me her opinion towards the Middle East was she really felt like she could care less if we just wiped out all of the majority Muslim countries. That's how far right and far Christian nationalism she is. She is pro-holy war. Okay? So, trying to communicate with this person is very difficult for me because I find it taxing and frustrating. They're so diametrically opposed to where I sit that it's sometimes you can not even know where to begin. So, in a totally unrelated thing to anything like that, here's an example of a conversation that was interesting. I asked my mom if she would be willing to witness me having a disagreement with people where we discuss things on a philosophical level where we're trying to get at truth rather than the type of arguments her and I would always get into. And so we sat down and the particular topic at hand was, do people have souls? And very philosophical, right? Very chunky. You might be rolling your eyes. But I sat down with somebody who kind of thought more of the reincarnation kind of concept of souls. And another person, that was my wife actually, and another person who thought more of the, I would say, traditional, Judeo-Christian concept of souls, mm-hmm. right? You have one soul, it's going to go to the good place or the bad place, or at least to somewhere after you die. And then you had me, the super scientific skeptic who thinks souls are bullshit. Mm-hmm. And I wanted my mom to witness 3 people having a philosophical conversation that didn't turn bad. And so I asked her to sit there and not respond for an hour while we worked this out. And we presented arguments back and forth. And it was remarkable because at the end of it, my mom just went, that was all very interesting. And didn't provide that. And so what's the moral of that story? Set up your conversation and agree on the rules. So many things turn into a political fight or political argument because you don't agree on the rules. One of the things I did with you when we first started talking about these things is, look, I'm not necessarily trying to change your mind. I'm curious about your perspective if you're willing to be curious about my perspective. So let's talk about this. I'll present counter arguments where I see fit, but the goal is to see if we can get any closer at the end of this conversation. And if at any point we derail or we start to get into a fight, that's not going to be very productive. So I'll just remind us that the goal is to try and see if we can see each other where we're coming from. Right? And see if we can make sense of our different perspectives. And if you set the conversation up with agreeing on that mutual goal, I promise you, you will have a 110% better conversation.
Makes sense, dude.
Obviously, I won. Souls are bullshit.
Oh my gosh.
If you believe in souls, I mean, I'm not actually disparaging you. It's one of the most common beliefs in the world. I just do me the favor of admitting you don't have real evidence for it. That's all I ask. You just feel like we should have them.
And if you're willing, we're in the Discord. So
yeah, exactly. Come at me. It's a really fun conversation that we can have in a non-confrontational way because honestly, is it that big of a deal? If I'm wrong, I'm just going to the bad place or something. So you win in the end. You can have a laugh at my expense.
Very true. Very true. Johnny, tell me about what happened with Tim Pool.
Oh, boy. So I just earlier told you all the greatness about independent media and why it's better than corporate media. And then it turns out independent media is just as corrupt. Let me explain. Not all of independent media, but I think there is more of this going on than we want. So first we have to remember back to when there was issues during the 2016 election. There was an argument that Russia was meddling in our election. You probably heard that. You probably thought, that's bullshit. The Mueller report said no collusion. That was the story that got told to everybody. But if you had actually read the Mueller report and you learned some things, you would find out that they absolutely were meddling in our elections. It's just there was no direct connection to Donald Trump specifically being involved with them. But they have definitely been trying to meddle in our elections. Flash forward to now, and YouTube is slowly becoming the number one way people can consume media content. It's overtaking corporate media at a crazy rate. That also attracts the same kind of nefarious interests. And you have to remember that, is there are people who want to pay for and buy that off. If you do go watch the Daily Wire, like I talked about, it's obnoxious because every 3 minutes there's an ad read. They cannot wait to jam those ad reads into every single commercial. And speaking of that, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Big Maple Syrup. Just kidding. They are doing this. So again, the whole point of independent media is it's supposed to be free of those advertising dollar incentives. And look, if you have a YouTube channel that just gets the AdSense ads, and if you don't know this and you're watching this, that's basically the default ads that YouTube just runs. If your channel gets big enough, you'll get a little bit of a trickle of money from that. It's really not at nearly as much as you might think, right? But if your videos get big enough, whatever, you get an ad share of the revenue that Google is getting from their default advertisers. Google's general advertisers, it's pretty vanilla stuff. It's products, it's services, it's stuff that's not a big deal. Now, most of the YouTube channels I watch that have something to do with gaming, for some reason, all advertise VPNs. I don't know why VPNs are sponsoring ad content. If you go watch Daily Wire, notice who's advertising on there. It's very specific companies that are, like, interestingly kind of things that would maybe favor more of a Republican audience. So that's the first thing that tips you off. It's like Black Rifle Coffee Company and gold stocks and like stuff that would appeal to people who are a little bit more skeptical of the establishment. And they like things that are like more towards the right-wing values. Okay.
Right.
So the first thing you need to understand about this story is that there is big money out there for this. That's like way, 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 way more than what the YouTube default ads will ever pay you. That's why these YouTubers take the sponsorships. They literally make more money off of those sponsorships. There's big money in the sponsorships. When you're talking about the video game guys, not very much. Like, they talk about this. One of them I watch is Bellular Gaming. He does Warcraft videos. Not only does he do ad reads, which is obnoxious, he also gets the default ads, and he has a Patreon. And it gets annoying, because I like his content, but it's like, man, dude, I gotta get through 3 layers of you trying to pay your bills just to hear your shit. You know? So he advertises like 3 of those. And is that any different than trying to watch corporate media at that point? I would argue no. At that point, you're no better than the TV channel where you get a 3-minute segment of the thing you actually care about and then commercials. So all of this builds to Tim Pool, who is somewhere in the top 8, top 10 most popular right-wing commentators in the YouTube space, as well as a few others like Dave Rubin, who is more popular than he should be, but he's not quite on the Tim Pool level, right? And there were a few other, I can't remember their names. The Department of Justice creates a case, or builds a case over time, that this new company, Tenet Media, its 2 founders were colluding with Russian interests that were paying them over the course of the existence of Tenet Media, which has only been since 2022, something like $100 million.
Wow.
For YouTube content being produced across these channels. Or maybe it might be 10, not 100. But the point is compared to what the average bigger YouTuber makes, it's like an absurd amount of money. Even if it's 10 million, that's crazy. These guys could never make that on their own. When it came to Tim Pool, it was $100,000 a video for 1 video a week. That's an absurd amount of money. If you look at the Department of Justice indictment, it was obvious. It's dead to rights. They're going to pay for this legally. And you could immediately tell, because all of the commentators who were getting money from Tenet Media, unwittingly, they didn't know they were getting paid by the Russians. It's interesting that their narrative was conveniently what the Russians preferred. You know, right? The Russians weren't paying for David Pakman. They weren't paying for Kyle Kalinske. They were paying for Tim Pool and for Dave Rubin. That tells you a lot. Why is it these guys they were getting paid for that happen to be some of the most pro-Trump people on YouTube? Now, they immediately came out, and it looks like from the indictment they had no idea the money was coming from Russia. But that's the problem. Somebody walked up to you with an $100,000 a week check, way more than you get paid for anything else that you do. And you didn't go, huh? Why? Why do you suddenly just want to pay me all this money? They just took it. And the reason why the Russians specifically looked for these people is because they were already swaying in their direction. Both of those 2 channels in particular, if you go watch them, you don't have to take my word for it, but I will tell you, I've done the research, okay? They are shockingly anti-Ukrainian aid. Something that the entire rest of the West has already agreed upon. Every single country in the West, every single NATO country, we're all trying to help Ukraine out because there's an unjust war between Russia and Ukraine. But these 2 right-wing YouTubers we should stop giving money to Ukraine. Wonder why Russia would be interested in that. Now, if you're like, okay, was it 2 random Russians? No. It was 2 members of Russia Today. Russia Today is the propaganda state-run media arm of the Russian government. So this is directly tied to the Kremlin. This isn't just 2 random Russians that want to fuck up American politics. This is specifically a massively powerful, paid for and ran by the Kremlin Russian media outlet, paying for a narrative and trying to boost it. So
now you say the indictment came out that they said they didn't know it was from Russian, but last time I looked into this with you, there's no way they couldn't have known. In fact, we have text messages or emails coming from.
So that's true for the founders, just to be clear. That's true for the founders of Tenet Media. They knew they were colluding with Russia. The YouTubers that they duped, like Tim Pool, right? They didn't know.
Is this
But
is this like what Tim Pool says, or is this what like
This is in the
prosecutors
case.
also agree?
This isn't the case. Now, again, if somebody's offering me $100,000 for a week, I'm going to ask where the money's coming from. Nobody's just going to suddenly offer me that amount of money without me being curious as to why or what I'm getting in return for it. Now, again, if you're in the party of, I want to not incriminate Tim Pool about this because, look, he didn't know. That's what he said on his YouTube. I'll give you the fact of why that's not really the case. Also in the indictment, these two Russian nationals, part of Russia Today, created fake aliases in a Discord that was shared between all of the Tenet Media shows. And those fake aliases were giving instructions in there to the producers of all these shows of what content to put on their channels. And they were agreeing to it. They have evidence of, they said, hey, cover this, talk about this, do that. And then immediately, turns out next day, that's what's getting covered on these channels.
I mean, I assume they would be giving instructions to do pro-Russia content, like,
Yep.
don't say this about Ukraine. Try to say something about like this about Ukraine, you know.
Do you remember the Tucker Carlson going to the Russian grocery store?
No.
You didn't ever see that?
No.
Oh my
What is
God,
this?
dude. You as a fan of comedy, you would appreciate it. Okay? Because it's so obviously like propaganda for Russia, it's embarrassing. It's the cringiest video you'll ever watch. It's basically Tucker Carlson just walking around a Russian grocery store and being like, look how much nicer their grocery store is than ours. And then there's this one part where he like picks up a loaf of bread and he's like, oh, that's so good. Oh, like
Oh my God.
Jon Stewart had the best joke on that where he's like, ugh, I hate to see what would happen if he came across a bagel.
Oh my God. That's funny.
Oh, dude, it's wild. And so there's this conversation that the indictment has a record of between these two Russian guys and the other ones where the producers of the shows were like, that's too cringy. We don't want to cover it. And they're like, no, this is good. It's going big. You guys got to cover it. This is a huge story.
You know,
And then they covered it.
right in the same note, in a lot of the right-wing spaces on the internet where lots of like stuff like that gets circulated around, there's this Twitter channel called End Wokeness, and it will constantly, are you familiar with that channel?
I am.
You are? Okay. And it's constantly posting like right-wing, like dunking on liberals, Chad memes, that type of stuff where it's it's been here for a while. Pretty good following. I see its tweets on other platforms all the time. Mm-hmm. And there's a YouTube video came out how some guy did a deep dive on them, investigated them, and it turns out they're just like a Russian plant. They're literally just Russian plants like fueling our media with polarizing info. And we just saw that with Tim Pool. Go ahead.
The vast majority of that is on Twitter. Like
I
Russia
see.
has pumped tons of money into Twitter, which again, if you're an Elon Musk stan, all of this went on, and then he looked at all that and said, I want to buy it, and has never really addressed it. In fact, he's removed the restrictions that Twitter was trying to do to get rid of the bots. He's made it easier to bot X, not less. Facts.
Interesting. And we've seen that with Tim Pool too, or obvious Russian hack at that point. So I guess I'd ask this, Joni, if Russia's plan is to divide America, and well, I'm assuming this is true, that Russia's plan is to divide America and make us more and more polarized, you know, and destabilize our nation. Why don't they do this stuff on the left too? Or have they? Or have we found them out to be that?
So far, no. In some cases, not necessarily directly to Russia. Now, we do know that there are foreign media companies. And so, okay, let me clarify. When I say so far no, I mean we don't have any current proof of them paying large sums of money to specific hosts that tend to favor a side. Now, they do have tons of bot accounts that seem to be just political shit starters. They have those on the left and the right. Because, again, division is good. We just don't have evidence yet of them funding a left-wing one. Now, we know Putin wants Trump. At this point, that's very obvious. He just came out and he claims he endorses Kamala Harris. But he this is ridiculous. He knows that Trump would be much more manipulatable and favorable towards getting American support away from Ukraine. The Republicans have been mealy-mouthed on that. There's this divide internal of the Republican Party right now, whereas there's no divide at all on the Democrat side. They are
Why
fully
would Trump be more favorable to Putin?
It's a great question. In general, I think it's just because he seems to like dictators. In the most recent debate, there was a moment where Kamala Harris baited him into a very stupid thing where she was like, all the other national, countries' leaders basically think you are a disgrace and you can't be worked with. And he was like, no. Viktor Orban loves me. Ruthless dictator. There's the whole love letters with Kim Jong-un. There's him regularly being on record of celebrating strong men in a number of countries. Brazil was one. I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, but there was a time where he said something about ruling with an iron fist, not in the way where you and I would say that as like a bad thing, where it was Xi Jinping. He was celebrating him for ruling with an iron fist, as if that's a good thing. So I think in general, he's just attracted to strong men, strong leaders. He likes that. And he likes the, I'm not going to put up with bullshit. And I mean, if you look at what his policies are, his answer to things are use the maximum force until the problem goes away. That's his approach on immigration. That's his approach on a lot of different things.
And Putin thinks that would be good for Ukraine?
So, I think the only reason why Putin favors Trump is because he thinks he's the easiest to manipulate. To create a weakness that he can somewhat exploit. That's my best. Look, we're speculating. Nobody knows what's actually in Putin's brain, right? Mm-hmm. But that's my sense of it. I think that he feels like he can manipulate Trump into getting a more favorable outcome from the West, getting us to back off a little bit.
I think the only thing that could possibly come out of the right winning would be, in general, the right generally wants to detach from Ukraine and send less support and not support them.
Yeah, and my whole point to that is, did they originally, or has this been funded by this media collusion? Because I think that the kind of right wing, here's a concept that is so obviously self-contradictory. Most of the Republican Party, most of the right wing channels support maximum support of Israel. What's different here? What's different here? In one case, you're like, the arguments they make for Ukraine is we need to worry about our own affairs and stop meddling in other ones. We need to be less interventionist on the world stage. Okay, well then, by that logic, you should have to then also renounce support of Israel. No, we can never do that. This is two contradictory positions. Mm-hmm. And so the only thing that makes sense of that contradiction is if there has been a concerted, and obviously we now know, paid for effort to get them to change their mind about support of Ukraine. And there have been lies spread on some of these channels, which I'm not going to get into because it gets messy. But, I mean, they're intentionally telling you falsehoods about the start and the origins of the Ukraine-Russia war to try and get you, the audience member, not to support aiding Ukraine.
Who's intentionally telling them?
Tim Pool, Dave Rubin.
Makes sense.
Some of them. Because there are other right-wing channels which are generally just don't touch this topic. It's not interesting anymore. right? But a year and a half later, some of these ones that we now know are paid for by Russia are still talking about it because they're being paid to.
I guess I'd ask you this, Johnny. How do you know who's a media grifter at this point?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Look, over the course of human history, we have decided that some markets, some ways of doing business must be banned. We've done this with slave markets. We've gotten for profit out of energy, right? For the most part. In a lot of cases, most energy production is state subsidized, state run, and has so much regulation on it that you could not argue it's really a for-profit enterprise anymore. There is a limit. If you're an electric company, you are basically limited to the amount of profit that you can bring in because of how regulated it is. You know that from being in solar.
Right.
The price is the price. In other words, it's fixed. We've banned slave markets. We know that when it comes to energy, there shouldn't be for-profit. Most people agree, even though we don't have that system now in America, that medicine shouldn't be a for-profit enterprise, that war shouldn't be a for-profit enterprise. Neither should media. Neither should media, because that's where the bad incentive structure comes in. It means I'm not going to tell the truth anymore, because I'm going to have to tell you the story you want to hear, or the most sensational thing, or the thing that makes you watch me instead of my competitors. Because that is what creates a scenario that makes the incentive not the truth. Anything that takes the incentive away from the truth is that. It's why so many other countries that we consider liberal democracies, right, that have, they have state media outlets that are publicly funded. We have one in this country, NPR.
Yeah.
That is entirely funded by donations. But again, most of the donations that come to it are from large corporate interests. It's not the same as taxing people and paying equal amounts to media companies for them to run their operation, regardless of whatever. Which is,
on that note, subscribe to our Patreon and go to our Discord and tell us what you want to hear us talk about next.
True. So that's what I was going to say, is that would be the best result. The best result would be state-funded, no-profit media. We don't live in that world, so let's take the second best thing that we can get today. The second best thing that we can get today is truly independent media sources. How do you know the ones that are truly independent? They do no ad reads. None. I mean, zero. They get funded by Patreon support and the default ads of whatever media platform they're on, and that is it. Some political streamers have contracts directly with Kick or directly with Twitch because they're big enough. Even that is less bad than ad reads, because ultimately the only thing that Twitch and Kick care about is just that they're popular enough to get people to go to the Twitch or Kick website. Again, that's more of that default ad generation. So even somebody like Destiny, who has a direct contract with Kick, is a lot more independent, right, than the Daily Wire, who clearly is taking in big corporate money. Big corporate. I mean, they're basically just the new corporate media. So that's what I would say, is look for those people who do that. Now, if you're watching a channel like ours, we're talking about politics today, but we've also talked about relationships and unrelated things. I don't know what someone would want to pay us for. Right?
Factor meals, dude. Factor meals. I'm telling you, dude, don't ruin our chances of getting that Factor ad read money.
So because again, politically, we're not necessarily pushing. The point of our channel is not to do a political narrative. But if your channel is political in nature, and that's all you do is politics, again, I think you have an obligation to be fully independent. And if you're not willing to do it, we will always be able to call into question, why are you pushing a narrative? Is it because it's your opinion? Are we getting your genuine objective analysis? Or are we getting Black Rifle Coffee companies?
Makes sense.
That's the concern.
Makes sense.
So I personally, my favorite channel for just the news and evaluation of it is Secular Talk with Kyle Kalinske. And it's because literally for the last 12, 15 years, he's been on YouTube. Some crazy. He's one of the oldest in the business. His money entirely comes from Patreon and the default YouTube ads. He probably gets demonetized more than more than most people, and he doesn't give a fuck because he's worked his way up to individual donations. Does that mean I agree with everything Kyle Kalinske says? No, I'm not a sheep, and neither should you be. It's just that I want to believe that the newsman I'm watching is presenting their objective analysis of the situation, whether I agree with it or not.
Makes sense. Fair. I guess I'd ask you this, dude. Does any non-grift ad-based media exist? Is that possible?
No. So, and that's the frustrating part. And this is what I meant about in a perfect world, we would have state-funded, non-profit media companies that genuinely did not care about audience retention. They had no motivation to retain, keep, or gain audience. That incentive structure is guilty of one last final grift. And this does matter. It's called audience capture. And if you've never heard that term, it is one of the most pervasive in a media space like we're in here on YouTube. You need to capture an audience or you won't make money. And so the only way you can not really care about audience capture is if you're not doing this to make money. Like if this is a pet project for you, if this is a side gig. So one of my classic examples of this is Sam Harris. Sam Harris wrote a bunch of best-selling books, got a PhD in neuroscience, has a bachelor's in philosophy. He's pretty smart. He talks about a lot of different things. I actually disagree with Sam Harris, like politically, like massively. I'm way further to the left than him. I'm way more like, he's very centrist and a lot of, especially when it comes to foreign policy, like he's very pro-Israel. I'm not. Like politically, like me and Sam Harris very much disagree. But I do respect that a lot of his fortune came from selling the books before he ever started his podcast. He does have an app that he sells called Waking Up. It's completely untethered from what he does on his show. It's meditation. It's just straight meditation. There's really no grift there. Like, if you check out his app, it's truly just that. It's that. The thing with Sam Harris is he actually has had his audience probably entirely change because I think left-wing people used to follow him a lot more. And then as he became more and more centrist and favored some things that we tend to disagree with on the far left, people have moved away from him. And his content hasn't changed. It entirely comes from donations. He does no ad reads, and his stuff is like only half of his videos are on YouTube because most of it comes through actual like podcast apps like Apple Podcasts, etc.
Interesting.
And so, even more impressive to me, if you want to get Sam Harris's full content and you don't want to pay for it, you just have to go and tell them, I can't really afford to pay your subscription, and they will give you a full scholarship. They will basically just let you have it for free. Bingo. And so not only is there a paywall to get to the content, it's a paywall that you can bypass, and he tells you on the show, by the way, if buying me a cup of coffee means not buying yourself one, I don't want you to pay for my content. Here's how you can get a free sub. It's nice. That's as close as I'm aware of anybody making like truly generic content. And again, I mean, I don't think you should go listen to Sam Harris and agree with him. I disagree with him politically on a bunch of stuff. Some of his stuff is absolutely brilliant. He's a really smart guy at times, and other times he frustrates the ever-living hell out of me.
I mean, I think we have to, at some point, stop pretending that we all don't have to eat.
Yeah.
If I was Jesus and I had all the powers in the world to me and I could afford to create griftless content and where I never had to support myself at all, That would be cool. But the problem is I'm born a human as well, and I have a mouth to feed, you know, and hopefully maybe more than one mouth to feed one day, you know. And
that's where...
And that's why I publicly invite Factor to email me right now.
If we say Factor like 5 more times, do you think Google sends them a letter of like, here's a potential one that you can sponsor?
I've already gotten an email notification, actually. And I haven't even uploaded this yet. Yeah.
Look,
this microphone came from Amazon, by the way, so that's probably why.
That's where I would say the ones I'm most skeptical of, and I was skeptical of Tim Pool long before this Russia stuff came out. Did they seemingly come out of nowhere? Are they famous for any other reason? And is this their only source of income? When someone checks all 3 of those boxes, probably grift. And that was the case with Tim Pool. Why was he relevant at any, like, he seemingly came from nowhere. He's not even very good at it. It's the only reason why he's popular, and it seems like it's his only source of income. Okay, buddy.
Yeah.
As you look at somebody like Sam Harris, he checks none of those boxes. He was famous before he ever started a podcast. He wrote best-selling books. He was already an established intellectual in the United States, used to do media appearances on corporate media to talk about things that he talked about in his books, etc. Right? So he didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't his primary source of income. For the longest time, it was the authorship, right? But books are hard. So that's kind of the, you got to look at those factors.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Johnny,
I think we covered it, man.
I think that's good too.
Yeah.
I feel it. Well, sweet. Well, thank you. Now I'm going to go to editing this for the next week and a half straight. No lifing it. So,
dude, the election is only 6 weeks away.
Got miracles to perform here, Johnny. So
I'll finish one note that I think is relevant. And I think everybody should talk about this. And I forgot it.
Okay.
This stuff matters. If anything matters, losing the bastion of democracy that the United States has proven to be over its last 300 years is a terrifying prospect for the rest of the West. We are the biggest, most powerful military on earth. And if we cease to be a democracy because someone is able to steal our election, it's bad for the world for a very long time. It's like Hitler level bad. That's why there's so much alarmism. It's because we control half of the world economy and 60 to 70% of the world's military strength. And so if we fail to be beholden to some degree to the democratic will of the people, that's bad. So what can you do about it? Register and go vote. Young people are the smallest participating voting bloc, especially young women. You need to vote. If you are young, you need to be aware. You need to stop entertaining yourself to death and actually pay attention. This is important. Figure out what issues are important to you. Take some of the advice that we talked about here, and you need to register and go vote. Even if you think your vote doesn't count in your state, it doesn't until it does. You never know what's going to be the election that flips it. It wasn't that long ago in 1984 when Ronald Reagan had something like a 39-state sweep or something like that. It was one of the biggest landslides of all time. There are a bunch of states that never vote that way that did vote that way. This could be that election. If you pretend my vote doesn't count in my state, it can't be. That's how that happens. So it's important. Figure out what's important to you. Figure out your top 3 issues. Investigate the candidates. Try to find some independent media to give you it to you straight. And then vote. That's what I got.
Well said. Beautifully put.
All right, man.
That ends it. Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it.
See ya.